your famous Srimate Bhakti-Devacharya Siddharine. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nasta Praeshu Bhadresu Nityam Bhagavatam Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhagavati Naistiki Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 3 Further Inquiries by Vidura Chapter 7 Text number 11 text number 10. Okay, it's, I don't know if we can get it on the board right away. I'll just go ahead and read it.
Yes.
It's already there?
Certainly. I'll get it on the board in no time.
Where's it written?
No.
Oh, but I meant the sloka.
Shloka's coming.
Sloka's coming? Okay, we'll do the words and then the sloka. Yat Otena Vina Amusha Pumsa Atma Viparyaya Pratyate Upadrastu Swa Siraha Chedana Adikaha. Still working on it. We'll do the word be different, and then we'll do the sloka. Yat, thus, Otena, a purpose or meaning. Vina, without. Amusha, of such a one. Pumsaha, of the living entity. Atma Viparyaya, upset about self-identification. Pratyate, so appear. Upadrastu, of the superficial onlooker. Swasiraha, own head. Own head, O-W-N, head.
Bro.
Own head, like O-W-N. Yeah, own head. That's your head. Chaitana, Adikaha, cutting off. Okay. Yad Otena Vinamusha, Pumsa Atma Viparyaya, Pratyata Upadrastu, Swasilas Chaitanadika, Yadotena Vinamusha, Pumsa Atma Viparyaya, Pratyata Upadrasta, Swasilas Chedanadikaha, Yadotena Vinamusha, Pumsa Atma Viparyaya,
vipayaya.
Pratyata upadrastu
Pratyata upadrishtu.
Swasilas chetanadika
Swasilas chetanadika. Yat artena vinasmusha.
Yadatena vinasmusha
Pumsa atma vipayaya.
Pumsa atma vipayaya
Pratyata upadastu.
Pratyata upadrastu
Swashriyas chedanatika.
Swasilas chetanadika Yadatena vinamusha Pumsa atma vipayaya Pratyata upadrastu Swasilas chetanadika
Yadatena vinamushya.
Yadatena vinamusha
Pumsa atma viparyaya.
Pumsa atma vipayaya
Pratiyata upadrishtu.
Pratyata upadrastu
Swashiras chetanadika.
Swasilas chetanadika. Okay, we already did the word for word translation. Please repeat. The living entity is in distress
Living entity is in distress
regarding his self-identity.
regarding his self-identity.
He has no factual background,
He has no factual background.
like a man who dreams
Like a man who dreams
that he has cut his head off.
that he's cut his head off.
The living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. Srila Prabhupada's Divine Purport. A teacher in a school once threatened his pupil that he would cut off his pupil's head and hang it on the wall so that the child could see how his head had been cut off. The child became frightened and stopped his mischief. Similarly, the misery of the pure soul and the disruption of his self-identification are managed by the external energy of the Lord, which controls those mischievous living entities who want to go against the will of the Lord. Actually, there is no bondage or misery for the living entity, nor does he lose his pure knowledge and his pure consciousness. When he thinks a little serious about his position, he can understand that he is eternally subordinate to the mercy of the Supreme, and that his attempt to become one with the Supreme Lord is a false illusion. Life after life, the living entity falsely tries to lord it over material nature and become the lord of the material world. But there is no tangible result. At last, when frustrated, he gives up his material activities and tries to become one with the Lord and speculate with much jugglery of words, but without success. These activities are performed under the dictation of the illusory energy. The experience is compared to the experience of having his head cut off in a dream. The man whose head has been cut off also sees that his head has been cut off. If a person's head is severed, he loses his power to see. Therefore, if a man sees that his head has been cut off, it means that he thinks like that in hallucination. Similarly, a living entity is eternally subordinate to the Supreme Lord. And he has this knowledge with him. But artificially, he thinks that he is God himself. And that although he is God, he has lost his knowledge due to Maya. This conception has no meaning. Just as there is no meaning to seeing one's head being cut off. This is the process by which knowledge is covered. And because this artificial, rebellious condition of the living entity gives him all troubles, it is to be understood that he should take his own normal life as a devotee of the Lord and be relieved from the misconception of being God. The so-called liberation of thinking oneself God is that last reaction of avidya by which the living entity is entrapped. The conclusion is that a living entity deprived of eternal transcendental service to the Lord becomes illusion in many ways. Even in his conditional life, he is the eternal servant of the Lord. His servitude under the spell of illusory Maya is also a manifestation of his eternal condition of service. Because he has rebelled against the service of the Lord, he is therefore put in the service of Maya. He is still serving, but in a perverted manner. When he wants to get out of service under material bondage, he next desires to become one with the Lord. This is another illusion. The best course, therefore, is to surrender unto the Lord and thus get rid of the illusory Maya for good. It's confirmed in Bhagavad Gita chapter 7 verse 14. Daivi esha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya mamevaye papajante maya metam tarantite. Thus ends the Bhaktivedanta purport to the 10th verse of the 7th chapter of the 3rd canto, Further Inquiries by Vidura. Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Aganati Mirandasya Ginanjana Shilakaya Kachun Militam Yena Tadmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupaha Kadamayam Derati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Gupta Parakamalam Shri Guruns Vaishnavams Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahaguna Raghunatam Vitam Santam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahaguna Lalita Shri Visakam Svitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagapate Gopesa Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eswari Vrishabhanu Stutu Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavandanyaya Krishna Prema Parayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gauratishe Namaha Srila Prabhupada ki. So here Srila Prabhupada is taking the opportunity to point out the illusion of identifying with the Lord's external energy and trying to be an enjoyer like him. This is the initial Maya, that we want to enjoy like the Lord, thinking that we are the possessor of that which we enjoy. This is illusion. We are never the possessor of anything, and we are always enjoyed by the Lord. We are the Lord's enjoyment. We are his instrument, his energy. So he is enjoying, engaging us, or he's enjoying our service. That may come spontaneous. He doesn't have to dictate it as a super soul. But we spontaneously, lovingly serve him, and he derives great pleasure from that. But as soon as we want to assume his position and play the role of the enjoyer, then that brings us under the control of Maya, or his external energy, whereby we can actually think like that. An illusion. It's like a dream. The Lord actually creates this vast creation. It's like a dream because it's temporary. It really doesn't have any factual position because it's all based on the illusion that the living entity wants to enjoy like the Lord. We want to enjoy like him, so the Lord, he actually gives us this whole creation for that. Otherwise, it's out of place. And the real world, or the eternal world, it's out of place. The living entity is not the Lord, and cannot enjoy like the Lord, and should not try to enjoy like the Lord. It becomes worse than a rasa basa, or an improper mixture of the rasas of loving Krishna. It's so false or illusory, it really doesn't have any reality to it, other than an illusion. So, as soon as the living entity thinks like that, the Yoga Maya is so powerful that Yoga Maya casts us into the illusory world, which has a factual routine or program. It actually exists. It is the Lord's illusory energy, and it has reality or history. It has life. But because it's temporary, it's like a dream. A dream is also reality in the sense that we are dreaming. But it's temporary, so it's just an illusion. It doesn't really exist. I may have this and that in a dream, and I may do this and that, but when I wake up, it's all gone, it's disappeared, and I have to go about my life. So a dream doesn't have any permanent substance, and neither does the material world. But it serves the purpose for the living entity to play like the enjoyer and the proprietor. We actually get to think like, not just think like that, but actually do it. You know, a person, I mean, it's recorded down at the courthouse that a person owns this property, and the government thinks that, the people in charge of the government thinks that if they don't get the tax from that property, they're going to take it back because ultimately it belongs to the state. And everybody thinks like this because that's the reality in the dream or the illusion. So the Lord is so powerful that he can create a whole world where the little bitty expansions of himself, the little molecules of his energy, where they actually get to imitate, his thinking, or they get to imitate his ability or his life as the enjoyer and the possessor, even though it's not reality. It's just an illusion. But the living entity actually gets to play like that. We get to experience that. This enjoyment of what we possess, and thinking that I possess it, it is mine. And I am so and so. So,
Can I say something?
sure, but what do you want to say?
Prabhu was once speaking about how, everything was Krishna. But then he said, if this watch, Krishna has given me this watch to use in his service. So you can't ask me for this watch because I need this for Krishna's service. So he says that Krishna gives us things to do service with, and during that time we're responsible for it. And Krishna's given us that responsibility to take care of this particular piece of property, or this car, or this family, and so on and so forth. So, that's what Prabhupada used to always explain it. And Prabhupada was very strict. If you ask anyone with servants about keeping everything locked, all of his personal possessions that he's using in his service, all was kept locked. And he had keys for one box, and then another key for that, and another one was a key for a key for a key.
But that's thinking like a devotee. That's when one becomes a devotee.
Yeah.
People in illusion, they lock it up as their property.
Yeah.
So Prabhupada the problem is for the conditioned soul is that he can't adjust. Why these miseries are coming, including death, and why he has to suffer from these reactions. It's a very difficult thing to adjust. Therefore, Prabhupada is, in the sloka, is comparing it to a man in a dream who sees his head cut off. So, the reality of your head being cut off is that you no longer see. But when you see your head cut off, it means that you're just seeing your head being cut off is just an illusion. Your head has not been cut off. So similarly, the person in the material world who thinks he's the enjoyer and is suffering misery and therefore actually becomes confused about his self. Because why does myself have to suffer? He has to start thinking of all these things like a philosopher. But the reality is that he doesn't have to suffer. So he's like the man whose head's been cut off, but it really hasn't been cut off. He sees that it's been cut off, but he's just an illusion. So similarly, the man who's trying to be an enjoyer, he thinks that he is suffering, but in reality he's not suffering. He's just thinking in the wrong way. Or he's come under the control of the Lord's external energy because he's playing like the Lord. And Prabhupada takes the opportunity to point out the ultimate illusion that the living entity suffers when he actually comes under the control of swamis and yogis who are in the greatest Maya, and they convince him that he's suffering because he has not realized his state of moksha, liberation, whereby he again becomes his eternal, sometimes they use words like godhood. He again assumes his eternal godhood. Again he becomes God. He was only thinking in illusion. And so that person becomes completely misled when he starts to think, problem is, I haven't understood that I'm really beyond all this misery. Therefore, let me add into my life of enjoyment the practice of meditation or chanting or yoga so that I can understand my godhood and transcend misery. And they think like that. But they never actually attain success. Even if they're lucky enough to get beyond the pain of material nature and this bogus conception of life, they cannot go on without enjoyment. That is the Anandamaya or Anandamoya. That is the nature of life. The nature of the soul is that one must experience pleasure or bliss. So when the living entity thinks like that or feels like that, without actually experiencing Krishna consciousness, where's the bliss going to come from? There is no bliss in thinking I'm God when I'm not God. As soon as one tries to act like God, it all becomes exposed. Like Prabhupada uses the example that we should test a person. He may have said it in the previous purport. We have to test a person who claims he's God. Okay, you're God. Then show us your universal form. Or how are you God if you cannot even control your death? So they become exposed. So it's a very, it's the last snare of Maya, and it's actually the most crippled position. But the fool and the rascal is, thinking in this great illusion, and this bogus way. He never solves his self-identification problem. Even as God, he suffers. So he's like a man who sees his head cut off. He's just so mixed up. So similarly, he's an eternal blissful spirit soul, but because he's thinking in Maya, either as God or as the enjoyer and possessor, he never really is satisfied or blissful. He is always just the opposite. His identity can't escape the pains of life. It's most unfortunate. It's only the devotee who surrenders to Krishna and accepts Krishna's protection. It's only Krishna who can free one from this Maya. We can go and pay $75, $150. We can pay thousands of dollars for every hour that a psychologist tries to help us, or a psychiatrist, or any type of doctor, or yogi, or so-called master. But it will have little result. But as soon as we surrender to Krishna, or to Krishna's devotees, and to Krishna's bona fide representative, who is teaching us, Sarvadamam Vrityaja, just surrender to Krishna, he will protect you. Daivihiye Shagunamayi, this powerful Maya of Krishna cannot be overcome. Mama Maya Duratya Yamame Kam Mame Viye Prapajante, but if you surrender to Krishna, Mayam Etam Trantite, you become free as soon as we surrender to Krishna. But that surrender to Krishna means we have to give up this bogus conception that I'm the possessor and I'm the enjoyer, and that somehow or other I'm the controller, I'm Krishna, I'm the Ishwar. No, we're just very little parts and parcels of Krishna who are his instruments, and we assume some control on his behalf. We accept some enjoyment on his behalf because that's our nature. We all enjoy when we take his prasadam after a big sacrifice. We all enjoy in various ways the success of our service. And we get an anxiety when we have some doubt about being able to please him. But it's all based in Krishna consciousness. Is the Lord's eternal servant. And that's actually a person's life. And as soon as we deviate from this position of being the eternal servant of Krishna, then that is Maya, and that is real suffering. And it doesn't stop until somehow or other we come in contact with the Lord and his devotees, and they actually benedict us with devotional service. Otherwise, the wheel of samsara, it just never stops. The Lord's material creation is so great that it just gets wound up and started again. Something like a top. You spin the top, and when it stops, you wind it up and you spin it again. So it just keeps going on and on and on, because ultimately it's under the control of Krishna. But every time it goes on, the living entity gets the chance to get out. But it's a matter of who he will surrender to, or who she will surrender to. Will we surrender to Krishna, or will we try to be like Krishna? You know, it's very difficult to get out of it. It's the greatest addiction on earth. You know, being addicted to this false position. You know, it's impossible to escape it. You know, people try to find so many solutions, but the solution given by Krishna and his bona fide representative is that we must surrender to Krishna. Lord Chaitanya epitomized it. His disciples all taught it. And they all enjoyed being Krishna's eternal devotee, even with nothing in this material world. A perfect example is the Lord Chaitanya's intimate disciples. Most of them, all of them, came from very big backgrounds, either as princes or very high-class Brahmins. And they gave it all up for nothing, meaning that they didn't take anything with them. They didn't have no money. They didn't even have, you know, fancy clothes. They didn't have transportation. You know, they didn't have anything other than Lord Chaitanya's order to excavate Vrindavan and to write down his teachings and to teach the science of devotional service. They gave up families. They gave up, you know, all their connection in the material world. They didn't even have a house. And they always enjoyed in Krishna consciousness. All the way down to our Srila Prabhupada, who ultimately did the same thing. He gave up everything in order to serve Guru and Gauranga and bring Krishna consciousness around the world to all of us fools and rascals, so we could practice the science of, again, surrendering to Krishna and again going back home to Godhead and bringing an end to our bogus, false material existence. So I'll conclude there. Comments, questions?
But, you know, they say that people that have out-of-body experiences, you know, they can see themselves in an operating room, or you see people standing around him and he's being pronounced dead, and he sees the whole thing. He's floating above. Then when he comes back in, he describes the whole scene. So that example about cutting off the head, I mean, technically, that's a good example, but on the subtle plane, there's still vision.
Right, but that makes it real. That's what he can't understand. Why do I have vision of something better than having to suffer in this body that gets its head cut off? Just like the man who comes back in after seeing the operation. Why do I have to again now be tormented by having to go through therapy after this operation? Because after every operation, you don't just jump up and run out. Even athletes, you know, they have to go through all these therapeutic things for months to try to regain the use of their leg. So that contradiction, that I knew I was something beyond this, but yet here I am again. So that's what it means by a man who sees his head cut off. He's identifying that my head's been cut off. But no, you're seeing it cut off. It's not really cut off. So similarly, you know, we're seeing our body being operated on, but that means I'm not the body. You know, I'm something greater than that. But, you know, no one can have the perfect knowledge unless they get it from the person who's free from the illusion. That's Prabhupada used to use the analogy of the blind man. You know, or the man that's tied up. They can't untie anyone else. So, you know, we have to, the bona fide spiritual master, the bona fide representative of Krishna, they can untie a person from the gunas or the illusion. But the person who is tied up, they can't, even if they're a big swami, a big philosopher. big scholar. They may have thousands of followers, just thousands and thousands of followers. But do they ever just surrender to Krishna and become his pure devotee? No, they always have all these other philosophies and all these other duties and services, or no duty, and they think that in so many ways that either they're nothing or they're this substance called Brahman and they have become one with it. So they think in all these illusory ways until they meet a person who's really not tied up. A pure devotee of the Lord, and he can explain this simple purport. And then they may have faith or may not have faith. But those who have faith, they can become disciples and become untied. Those who don't have faith, how can they ever become a disciple? They have to keep going around and around and around until somehow ever we happen to put our faith in the right thing. So, Krishna's in charge. He makes all sorts of arrangements in society, just like, all of us grew up in some type of Christian family that taught us our initial morals in life, Therefore, we didn't become thieves. We didn't become murderers. We didn't become, maybe not even agnostics or atheists. Had some little faith. But then by the arrangement of Krishna, we actually meet a pure devotee like Srila Prabhupada, or one of his devotees that say the further explanation of the spiritual world, further explanation of that God that we're all trying to worship is found in this Srimad Bhagavatam. And so therefore, we become further untied until the point that Prabhupada wants us to go out and help untie others. But, each of us just with the capability of our own realization, just like Prabhupada compares that to the birds that fly. The sparrow flies so high, but the hawk flies higher, and the eagle flies even higher. So just as based upon the capacity of a bird, they fly so high. So based upon our Krishna consciousness, our purity, our self-realization, we untie other people's hands. So therefore, there's an introductory guru, there's an initiating guru, and there's instructing guru, and then there's Krishna within the heart. Is the guru of the guru. He's the supreme guru. He's the supreme personality of Godhead. So in this way, all of us are being relieved by the mercy of the Lord, and at the same time, we experience that perversion or that illusion of being the enjoyer, being the proprietor. Some are ready to give that up, and others aren't. And that's everyone's prerogative. We have our individual right. Like, we don't force people. In fact, we genuinely make friends with people. Like the Goswamis that I was talking about that didn't have anything, but still they were liked by everyone, the good people and the bad people. Everyone liked them because they were nice and they were Krishna conscious. So similarly, we don't force someone to surrender to Krishna, but we give the opportunity, and then we just encourage people in the best way. Okay, anything else before we stop?
I'll say something real quick.
Sure, go ahead.
First of all, this is good class, because I always found it fascinating how in a dream I can totally forget my family and this life and identify with who I am in the dream. But another thing was when you were talking about Prabhupada locking up everything, I actually remember I was kind of careless about stuff like that, but then when I read in the deity worship handbook, it's one of the 64 items is to lock the door for deities, And so we have